Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is the fourth seminar in our Jung on the World Religions course. Today we have Dr. Tony Wolfson with us, and he's doing Jung on the Jewish mystical tradition. Speaking today will be Dr. Tony Wolfson. He will be our presenter. Murray Stein is here as well. He will be a panelist. And then I'm here just as the AJC host and technician. We have several participating countries. We have Australia, Colombia, Canada, France, Hong Kong, Japan, Scotland, Slovakia, Sweden, Switzerland, United Kingdom, and of course the United States. Today is a video webinar. They usually go 90 minutes, but today we will go up to 120 or even longer if we have enough questions. You're able to ask questions from any computer. Please use that chat feature, or you can also email us, ashevillejung@gmail.com. Make sure you clicked on the correct audio setting. You'll either listen to us through your computer or through your telephone. You can make those selections on the control panel. If you have any questions on that, please give us an email. Do explore the features. The full screen mode, you can make that picture as big as you would like. So make sure you're not just watching a tiny little picture. You can make that as big as you would like. We are recording today, so if you have questions and you don't want us to know you, if you want to remain anonymous, just let us know when you ask. Our next seminar coming up next weekend is Love, Sacrifice, and Individuation, and that is the second seminar in Emma Jung with author Imelda Goddesart, and that's at 12 noon. And then after that, on May 2nd, we have Life and Ideas of James Hillman, and that's by author Dick Russell, who's a wonderful expert on the topic. And that will be out at the Jung Institute of San Francisco. We always love putting on their webinars. So without further ado, I'll let Murray take it over and introduce Tony.
Thank you, Ryan. This is the fourth in the series of seminars, webinars on Jung and the world religions. And the rationale for these seminars is that Jung had a lifelong interest in studying the world religions. He studied all of them, some detail or another, and he both interpreted the world religions and he learned from them. And in these webinars, we are trying to approach Jung's understanding of the world religions and what he did with them and how he understood them and used them in his psychology. This fourth webinar will be on the topic of Jung and Judaism. We've covered Jung and Christianity, his own background, religious tradition, and we spoke also about Jung and Eastern religions. Jung was especially close to Judaism after his own religious tradition. Of course, Christianity is an outgrowth of Judaism in a sense. The New Testament is an extension of the Old Testament, a continuation of the revelation of God in the Christian's understanding. And so, and Jung was surrounded by Jewish patients and students. And so he was exposed deeply and challenged by his students to speak about Judaism, to take a position, to understand it, even to write a book about it. Erich Neumann urged him at one point to write a book about it, which he never quite got around to, but he did deeply study it, and especially the mystical part of the Jewish tradition. Tony Wolfson is going to speak today about that in particular. Tony Wolfson is an independent scholar. He lives in Zurich. He teaches, he's lectured at the Psychological Club. He teaches at ISEP in Zurich. And he is steeped in the subject of the Jewish tradition, grew up in it, is very familiar with all of its aspects, and especially interested in the subject of Jewish mysticism, the Kabbalah, which is what he is going to focus on in particular, and Jung's relation to that. So, Tony, I'll turn it over to you. I look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Well, thank you, Murray, and thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Steve, for the invitation. It's caused me just a little novelty in that I've never done this before. I've never sat at a computer staring at myself talking about the mysteries. So in fact, it's a complete mystery to me what exactly will happen in the next 2 hours. I come well prepared, but that may or may not mean much. because one of the features of the mystical is that out of the mass of mystery, there may or may not come meaning. So let's take the title, which I have already written about in those three preliminary, shall we say, they're like a amuse-bouche in a restaurant where you get a taste of what the chef has to offer. And with Ryan's help, I grasped how to do those things. And 1, 2, 3, we got 3 of them in the last week. And it included images, which a couple of which I'll be discussing here as well. So I'll make an heroic assumption, which is that some or all of the people tuning in right now have in fact looked at these 3 missives, if you like, these 3 pieces from the menu. So if we take Jung and the Jewish mystical tradition, Jung we know, or we think we know. Jewish we probably know, or we think we know. It's Jewish as opposed to Christian, as opposed to Muslim, as opposed to Hindu, as opposed to Buddhist, as opposed to Taoist, as opposed to Shintoist, or whatever. Obviously, there are cross connections and interplays. There are, if you like, parallels between Jewish and Christian and Muslim, especially because they're the big monotheistic traditions, more or less emanating, I shouldn't say emanating, more or less, that comes up later, but they certainly evolved from the same place, and that would be the Holy City, the four-gated city, the walled city of Jerusalem, if you think about it. Which has actually caused and continues to cause no end of historic trouble. So in that sense, we have a lot in common. But here we are, you see, we're looking for parallels. Jung certainly thought he found serious parallels as between the Jewish mystical material and Christian mystical material, or you could say Christian material itself, as in the birth of the Son of God, the numinous archetype of Jesus. So we have the Jewish and the Christian. It's really that on which we have to focus. But to begin with, we have the next word, and the next word is mystical. So it's Jung and the Jewish mystical tradition. Mystical is a lovely word, as I'm sure you think of it, as you know, I'm sure you know. Murray Stein has certainly alluded to it in the earlier presentations on Jung and religion, because we would want to say, I think, that the kind of original subjective personal religious experience that Jung certainly encouraged and that we like to prefer to the sometimes moribund dogmatic material. That kind of experience is often mysterious and mystical. Now, the word mystery, it's always nice to track things from where they began. The word mystery and the word mystical, of course, go together, and they both come from the Greek. And the first time mystery really comes up is concerned with the mysteries, especially the mystery at places like Eleusis in Greece, starting around 1500, about 800 years before the coming of Christ. And the mysteries there were instituted to honor the goddess Demeter. Now, the Greek word mystes means one who closes the eyes, and perhaps closes the mouth as well, which wouldn't leave us much to do at a time and place like this. The point being that in order to enter the temple, or during the sacred rites themselves, one might not be permitted to see and certainly not to speak. It's a fantastic notion, really. We remove our hats and we remove our shoes, or we put on hats. And in the synagogue, I'd just like to mention, it suddenly struck me, that we actually more or less close our eyes at the point in the Sabbath and the festival services at which the descendants of the priests in Jerusalem, those who are considered to be Kohanim, they ascend the steps to the Holy Ark where the Torah, the scroll, is placed, and they incant the threefold blessing that Aaron made to the children of Israel. May the Lord bless you and keep you, and the other two. And they're very famous, and we all know them. But the point is that they do this. They cover themselves completely. You don't see their faces, even if you were to look, which you're not allowed to do. And on no account in those moments are you allowed to look at the place in front of the Holy Ark at which the priests are intoning the blessings. And there's a little bit more, because this is clearly a mystical inheritance, right there in the center of the ritual of the daily services. But there's more than that, because when you in the Day of Atonement services, I'm remembering that at certain points there are funny little letters which are unreadable, and you have to scan those but not read them. And they're very strict on this in the Orthodox. Now, the reason I mention this, is because, at least in Judaism, they never completely got rid of the mystical. And in fact, there are mystical elements in the rituals themselves and in the prayer services. So when we say Jewish mysticism, it is separate, and it absolutely is not separate. I shall come back to that in a moment, but I just want to mention that for Jung, the mysterious, quite apart from the obvious title Mysterium Conjunctionis, the mystery of the conjunction, the holy union of male and female, Jung was very, very possessed by the importance of secrets, or we could say mysteries. And inviolable secrets must never be betrayed, because he felt that the safety of his very own life depended on it. And what that was for him from the earliest childhood days was the little mannequin that he carved, and that he hid in the Estrich, as the German word reads, the attic, the part of the way up at the top of the house under the roof. And he said that, it's in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, he said, the possession of a secret made a very powerful formative influence on my character. I consider it the essential factor of my boyhood. And I have to say, my experience of standing in the synagogue all through those years, I was very prone to experiencing these mysteries as quite the mysterious elements that they were intended to be. The thing about it needs to be remembered in the Jewish mysticism, it needs to be remembered that Jewish mysticism really was embedded and was inseparably part of Jewish Orthodox. It wasn't Orthodox because there was nothing else in those days. It was really part of the Jewish religious observant tradition. So let's take the word tradition. We all know there's a Jungian tradition. The very word Jungian implies that it has gone beyond what Max Weber would say was the first of the three evolutions of authority, the charismatic. Jung was very obviously a charismatic figure and remained so, and was spectacularly large. And at some point, as we can imagine, that gives way to what is actually called by Weber the traditional type of authority. And that's when people start to smoke their pipes the way Jung does, and to start to look like him, and to talk like him, perhaps, and to think of things as being the orthodox Jung way as a tradition. That's the traditional way of talking about Jung and doing the work. And the third thing Max Weber talks about, and they're sort of temporal, The third thing Max Weber talks about is the rational authority, and that's when we get the Jung institutes all over the world. And we even get the places like the Asheville Jung Center and what we're doing today. And this is where things are organized very sensibly at exactly noon in Asheville and at 6 o'clock my time. And here I sit surrounded by all my papers, and we are spreading the word in a rational, coherent way. At least that's the small prayer we make. And that's when you have teaching, and that's when you have training. And the same thing happens in the Kabbalah, you see, obviously, as a tradition. So when we say the Jewish mystical tradition, we are talking about ways of doing spirituality. We are talking about ways of doing Judaism that are more, to begin with, they're a little more charismatic than the sight of the rabbi in my synagogue banging on the pulpit because everybody's too noisy. So you have a new sort of type of charisma, you see, and you get traditions arising out of that, and you get the rituals, new rituals, but the rituals very, very, very importantly are always grounded in the Torah, for one thing, and they're always grounded in the whole Orthodox, what we now call the Orthodox Jewish way of doing things. It's a very difficult subject, and as I speak, I can feel the material coming in, which is quite good, because I'm remembering, you see, one of the more amazing things that Gershom Scholem, it's a great title. Gershom Scholem was the great, great scholar, magisterial, gigantic scholar of Jewish mysticism. And I'll be talking about him pretty soon, because he and Jung had a relationship that was not always, shall we say, in complete harmony. Now, Gershom Scholem came up with this lovely essay called On the Possibility of Jewish Mysticism in Our Time. And he more or less says that it's not possible. And he more or less says it's not possible because Jewish mysticism traditionally, even if it was, so to speak, rationalized at all into actual practices that were then done regularly, Jewish mysticism is rooted in an organic, spiritual, almost psychical, really, acceptance of the Torah as the living word of a living God, coming straight from Shamayim, heaven. I don't think there was a practicing Kabbalist that before the Christians came along and borrowed it. There wouldn't be one of them that was not enormously observant in ways that, for a lot of us, is simply not really possible anymore. Can one recreate that? I don't know. Now, when Gershom Scholem gave his groundbreaking lectures at the invitation of the, I think it was the Jewish Seminary in New York in 1937-38, just before the world fell apart and the man in the photograph I posted was probably killed in Krakow. When he gave his groundbreaking lectures, he ended them, and they were published as the incredible book, the first of its kind ever, in which there was an academic, so to speak, responsible, unbiased, careful gathering of the evidence of the stages through which we can say Jewish mysticism has evolved. And that's known as, what is it, you know, the Jewish mysticism. I forgot it. That's what happens. Doesn't matter. He ended it with a wonderful story. And I had the wonderful coincidence of thinking of ending a lecture I was about to give with that story. major trends in Jewish mysticism, sorry. And I had the idea of ending it with that wonderful story. And that very night, I couldn't remember where I'd read the story. And that very night, I had the idea. I opened another book entirely, a big Jewish book it's called, full of the most incredible mystical poeticals and all sorts of stuff from 2,000 years. And I opened that book, and there was a story on the first page. And as you know, sometimes life is like that, and we feel then we're blessed, and we feel we're on the right road. So I'll briefly tell that story. It has to do with the 4 stages through which it's thought that the kind of mysticism that was the Jewish Hasidic movement that started in the mid-18th century, through which that evolved. And the Hasidic movement was in East Europe. It was a sort of joyous embracing, almost drunken embracing of the glories of God, because their reality was so horrible already. And it became more and more so as the centuries wove on. But Hasidim was characterized by just those sorts of charismatic authorities, the first leaders. So it's imagined that the first one, who was known as the master of the good name, the Baal Shem Tov, it was imagined that he went off into the woods. He went off into the forest. Now, you see, Jesus and Elijah went off into the desert, but this being Northern Europe, Eastern Europe, he went off into the woods. And he knew the place to go. He knew how to light the fire. He knew the words to say, and whatever he wanted done and prayed for, lo, it was done. That's like the first stage, the immediacy of the words, which is like Hashem, the name of God, the immediacy of the name, Hamakom, the place, and the immediacy of the fire, the light, and the words, of course, are the prayers, you see. And he knew all that, and it was done. Now, the second guy comes along, and it's Dolph Bear of Mezerich, who's quoted by Jung as having more or less anticipated everything Jung wanted to say. And Dolph Bear did come up with the idea that you had to descend in order to ascend, which is precisely what Jung says in the Red Book, and that was marvelous. And Dolph Bear comes along, you know, as the story says it. We can't prove it. Dolph Bear comes along, and let's say he knew the place, and he knew how to light the fire, but he'd forgotten the words, the prayer, you see. But it was still okay. And then the next one was, I can't remember, but he knew the place, but he no longer knew how to light the fire, and he no longer knew the words, and it was still okay. And then along comes the teller of our tale, Hasidic master from Warsaw, in whose name this was written down about over 100 years ago. And he says he doesn't know the place, doesn't know how to light the fire, and he doesn't know the prayer. And that's us, because he says he knows how to tell the story. It's sort of fantastic. It's worth letting it sink in. Note again, this is how Gershom Scholem finished his 9, I think, lectures, a chapter each, in Major Trends in Jewish Mysticism, which is how the whole subject got reopened in 1937-38, published in 1941, just at exactly the same time as the wheels of destruction were running fast. So I have to, it's like an advisory. You see, if we're going to talk about Jung and the Jewish mystical tradition, you can't just, it's a very tricky subject, because you can't just say, oh yes, Jung was a Kabbalist. Well, he may have been, but he couldn't have been I don't know if he could have been a Jewish one, because he wasn't Jewish. You can be like a Jewish Kabbalist, you can identify with it, you can find all sorts of parallels. You can amplify Jung's material, and you can amplify the Kabbalistic material, and there's no question that there are some fantastic things in common. And I will, as we carry on, I mean, the tree of life is in common. The marriage of Malkut and Tiferet, as I posted in the third one, that's absolutely in common, as being about the male and the female. And the excitement about the Sephirot and the Sephirotic tree of life, which is picture of which has also been posted. That's all in common. There is one stumbling block, which I will mention now, and we'll come back to, I think. The stumbling block is that Jung considered he considered that the incarnation, by which he means God's decision to become man through Jesus, and thus the numinous archetype of Jesus, dogmatized in the belief that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Jung had the very powerfully held notion, idea, theory, I'm not quite sure how to put it. He certainly held it close, that that is prefigured in the ways in which the Jewish Kabbalists envisioned the energy of God emanating through God in the various levels of the Sephirotic tree of life. And that's a very hard one for Jewish people to accept. I think I'll be returning to that. It's a bit interesting, this, because nobody gets to say, stop, tell us now. I want though to I'd like just to I'd like to read something from Marie-Louise von France. It's a wonderful piece that she spoke in the film on Jung called Matter of Heart. I think that was made in late 80s. I've got that wrong. I knew it before and I've forgotten it now, the date. It's probably the best of the documentaries on Jung. It actually was a feature-length film that was shown in movie theaters, where we saw it. We saw it in Toronto, I think late 80s. So it must have been around then. She says, civilization needs a myth to live by. And I think that the Christian myth on which we have lived has degenerated and become one-sided and insufficient. I think alchemy is the complete myth. If our Western civilization has a hope for survival, it would be by accepting the alchemical myth, which is a richer completion and continuation of the Christian myth. The Christian myth does not include the dark feminine. It treats matter as dead, and it does not face the problem of the opposites, of evil. Alchemy includes all those, she says. And the good news is, so does Kabbalah. And if for no other reason, that's why Jung can be forgiven anything when I think about it, which isn't very nice. But it's true. Kabbalah absolutely accepts the darkness of the feminine. It accepts the feminine to begin with. In the Zohar, it's very clear. There's a wonderful riff. I like to think of it as a sort of the Zohar, the incredible stream of consciousness, active imaginations, fantasies, written down by Moses de Leon in 1280, and which the ultra-Orthodox insist, of course, were the actual words of Yochanan ben Zakkai from 2,000 years ago. But Shalom says, no way. But in the Zohar, one of the riffs, like variations on the theme from the 5 books, from the Torah, one of the riffs is that from God, male, female, created he, them, which is the second version of creation, and which then some feminists take naturally the notion that if it says in there, male, female, created he, them, how can we then say that male and female are as distinct as to permit male to dominate female? And in Zohar, it says it's unthinkable to imagine the two as separate, which is rather nice. And the Kabbalah also, of course, accepts the reality of evil. And we'll be back to that. I admit I haven't timed this. I see we're now about half past. I'd like to take a break in 15, 20 minutes just to let you know.
Do you have a quick moment, Tony? I've got someone with a quick want you to go over something one more time.
We have a nanosecond, Ryan.
A nanosecond, okay. After Sholem says, "That's us," what was the sentence after that? They missed your conclusion after we realized that that is us. Do you remember what you were talking about?
No.
I'm sorry, Tony. I just saw this pop up. I want to ask it directly when it happened.
That's us. Well, maybe that Kabbalah and mysticism, Kabbalah and alchemy are absolutely that there are one in the acceptance of, was it that? In the acceptance of evil and the earthly and the feminine.
It could possibly have been. I was answering an email, so I was not watching the presentation at that moment, but I think that may have been it, Tony.
I stand to be corrected, but we might have to wait. We might have to wait until we see the tape.
Oh, here's Murray.
Murray.
I think you were saying when Sholem said, "That is us." That is, we don't know where to go. We don't know how to light the fire, and we don't know.
Sorry. Well done, Murray.
That's
well
us.
done. Well done. Thank you. Sorry, Murray Stein. Thank you. That's it. Yes. To the person asking the question, I mean, it's such an important story. I'm delighted to. I could elaborate on it for a long time. Obviously, it's us in the sense that we are here today, having great difficulty accepting that the likes of the 5 books of Moses are the revealed words, letters, names, sounds of God, literally. Okay, it's the difference between a literal evolution or a literal expression. It's one thing to say that we revere and we stand in awe and we experience numinosity when we see and hear the words, but actually to believe that in their present literal form, they are God's letters and words and things and doings. That's a little difficult because we are creatures of history, for one thing, and it's very hard. I shall say it now and we could say it again and again. It's a whole other seminar. History is something we invented. The idea that time is on our side, the idea that tomorrow will be better, that's a complete invention. If we have all night, I can return to that theme, but thank you to the questioner. It's worth elaborating. I would like to say, though, that one of the last notes I made to myself just before coming on to this tonight, one of the last notes I made to myself was precisely that through Jung and through the work we can do in understanding Jung, learning about Jung, perhaps making an analysis, in studying our dreams, in being open to numinous happenings that cross our path, in having an awareness that there is a divine energy in the world. In that work, we absolutely do continue telling the story. And it doesn't really matter in a sense, given that the story, of course, is mythological and not literal. Like all myths, there are truth elements, like it's trees and forest, because it's Northern Europe. Eastern Europe, I mean, but it's not the desert where Elijah went, or where Jesus spent 40 days in some kind of probably despair. I'm not sure. Elijah was in despair because his life was on the line and he was running away. So, excuse me, I'd like to mention a very vital, it's by way of, again, this is partly its content and partly its perspective. There's, for me, one of the finest things Jung ever wrote in making a distinction between myth and literal. it's not stretching anything, and we all know it, is to say that there is mythological truth and there is literal truth. So, and our interest, I think, is in mythological truth, especially if literal, let's say, word of the law truth produces stultification, boredom, and the feeling, the experience that we're getting stuff rammed down our throats. And that, unfortunately, is the trouble with a lot of the observances and a lot of the enacted minutiae and rituals of organized religion. When Jung talks about the religions being tricked out in nice things like candles and incense and, you know, trappings and great uniforms and Vaticans and domes and, you know, crowds in St. Peter's Square. That's not very fair, but it's the idea is that sometimes takes us away from the original experience. And we know that in churches and temples and synagogues and mosques, it's sometimes very hard to have anything remotely resembling an original experience. Now, Jung has this wonderful statement from the psychology of the child archetype. And he says that, I want to get the words just right, religious observances, i.e. the retelling and ritual repetition of the mythical event, right? The mythical event is Passover, leaving Egypt. We didn't literally leave Egypt like 2 nights ago, but we retell it, and we don't even know if we were ever in Egypt, according to the historians. These retellings serve the purpose of bringing the image of childhood, which is the ever renewing, and everything connected with that. They bring the image again and again before the eyes of the conscious mind, so that the link, and that's the meaning of religion, remember religare, so that the link with the original condition may not be broken. So I was remembering fantasizing the song, May the Circle Be Unbroken, you know. Kabbalah tries, because it's called tradition, so it's trying to keep the circle, it's trying to keep the connection, and the way it's done is to keep renewing the rituals. That mythology, according to Kabbalah, according to Gershom Scholem, and Jung would absolutely agree, Kabbalah is of the orders of mythologies that takes a revenge on stultified, dogmatic, creedal rituals, which are more about preserving, let's say, the office of the rabbi or the priest or the minister, than they are about admitting that we're all in terror and we don't know where we're going. We don't know nothing. And that salvation can only be achieved through the synagogue, the mosque, the temple, and the church. That wonderful phrase, my Latin may not be up to it, extra ecclesia nihil salum, you know, outside the church. Now, I shall now read, just to get it clear again, Jung reminds us that the, quote, the purpose of the operation, all the things of dividing and looking at and getting conscious, the purpose is to create the beginnings of order in the massa confusa. This is it's just rather nice because it's a 17th century, 1655, it's a alchemistic image of the unfettered opposites in chaos. Jung reproduces it in black and white, but you know, you just go on to Google, you Google the name, and this is what you get, and then you send it over to your pal in Asheville. And here it is. These are the opposites in chaos, and this is where it all begins, you see. So in Jung's analytical psychology, the parallel to this, the beginnings of order in the massa confusa, is the reduction to order through reflection of apparently chaotic fragments of the unconscious, which have broken through into consciousness. The work is the religious work of approaching the numinous, requiring insight, courage, and action. And we often have to go through the darkness of our own souls, as we know, on a road often less traveled. Now, Jung found, the reason this is worth popping up, we can take it down now, thanks. The reason Jung found this interesting, because there's very close parallels, you see, between that path mediated by the self, which is the God image within, to an ever closer correspondence with the divine. And that parallels the alchemical process of extracting spirit from base matter. Very difficult, very up and down, very forward and backward. And Gershom Scholem says there is a structural relationship between the ascension from the lowest to the highest levels of the Kabbalistic tree of life and alchemical steps involved in the refining of the philosophical gold, according to a mystical view of the Ars Magna, the great art. And just to confuse things more a little, now, image number 2, Ryan, thank you. Yes, this for some reason, I just want to show this very quickly. This was reproduced in a little book called Kabbalah and Alchemy by none other than Gershom Scholem. And it's a 1602 alchemistic image of the alchemist's laboratory. So there are parallels, you see. So you're starting to bring together Gershom Scholem and his interest in alchemy and realization that, yes, there was Jewish alchemy as well, Hebrew alchemy. And then, of course, Jung, for whom alchemy is central, and in which there's so much of the Kabbalah, which you see in Mysterium Communitionis. Thanks. The difference, of course, and I repeat, the Kabbalists believed that in order to redeem, I've got my order wrong, sorry. No, I don't. Yeah, I'll just show this picture which we showed in, sorry, number 3, Ryan. Thanks. Now this is, you see, this is where it comes together. This is Adam expelled from the Garden of Eden, but out of him, you see, and this was posted on the site, out of him comes the tree of life growing. So out of the fallen Adam, which is like the base matter, out of the fallen Adam, you're getting this tree of life reaching up to the spiritual reality of the heavens. Now, I'd want to say, though, that in order for now Adam as fallen is signal in the whole Kabbalistic enterprise, because unfortunately it's taken as reality that it was the sin of Adam in getting us conscious, in eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that was the problem, whereby we now have to bring the fallen Adam back into our relationship with God above through the Shekhinah, the female. And it's the uniting of God above with the Shekhinah that is the goal of the Kabbalistic enterprise. But for the Kabbalists, I repeat, we have to follow the laws of Moses. It isn't enough. It may be enough. It may be the equivalent of doing what we do in the movement towards consciousness that we try to achieve. Okay, thank you. There's a very interesting parallel between Jung's making alchemy. That's okay, I don't mind that. There's an interesting parallel between Jung's making alchemy a respectable field of study and Gershom Scholem's study of old Kabbalistic manuscripts. You see, they were considered to be rubbish. And of course, alchemy was considered to be rubbish. So what was Jung doing, you see? So at one point, Scholem tells the story of going to see a rabbi in 1922, Philip Bloch in Berlin, and this guy's got tons of old manuscripts in Bloch, and Scholem says, "Oh, how wonderful! You've got all these marvelous old manuscripts." And then the rabbi says to Bloch, to Scholem, he says, "You don't think we're going to read? I don't have to read all that rubbish, do I?" So that didn't help matters. But Scholem, I have to say, was a bit disdainful, even though he presented at Eranos starting in 1949. Every year he presented his wonderful stuff. But he was a bit disdainful of what he considered to be Jung's lack, Freudian and Jungian lack of serious scholarship as to what the real basis for their interest in Kabbalah was. Now, what really interested Jung in the first instance, of course, was the Kabbalistic tree of life, the Sephirotic tree. And that is found in large measure in Mysterium Conjunctionis. He doesn't make what I might call controversial, debatable assertions there. He's concerned to show the parallels about Malkut and Tiferet, about the masculine and the feminine, about the widow and the orphan, and about the goal of the whole enterprise, which he sees in Kabbalah, which is there. But the Sephirotic tree starts to get very exciting. Someone has written, when Adam and Eve were cast out of the garden for having eaten the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they were forced to deal with the very opposites that still form our contemporary life, knowledge of good and evil. They ate the forbidden fruit, but they had also, and it's a marvelous point, they had also seen the tree of life. This is the basis of Jewish mysticism. Think about it. They were placed in the Garden of Eden. Every tree had fruit, except the one that they were forbidden to touch. It had fruit, but they weren't to touch it. But they got to eat all that fruit for free. Figs. They usually reckon they were figs galore. And in that sense, they experienced the tree as life-giving. And they didn't yet experience the tree as giving the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, which I suppose is akin to being aware of death and mortality. Because gods live forever, whereas once they were cast out, they knew what it was to experience mortality. And the fear was, of course, that humans would be like us, the gods. It actually says gods plural in the Bible at certain points, even though it's supposed to be just the one. It's interesting. So that's the basis of Jewish mysticism. Now, thanks. We'll take. I know we should have a little break soon because I've got that idea. Maybe not. Maybe we don't. We do or we don't need it. Trying to be flexible. Put up, if you don't mind, Ryan. Put up the tree of life, the number 4, right? My tree. Yeah, I call this my tree. We all have trees of life, you see. The tree, of course, is an incredible symbol. And this absolutely brings it all together in a beautiful way. Before we enter the specific myth of the Kabbalistic tree of life, the way the energy is envisioned as flowing down to us and up from the masculine at the top to the feminine at the bottom and back up. Now, the reason I put this up is because 20 years ago, I was, so to speak, desperately wondering in my initial entry into the depths and complexities of Jung. I was wondering, what is the objective psyche? And I went to sleep that night, and this is the answer. I dreamt that the voice of von Franz was saying that it was akin to this view, which is in Switzerland, right in the heart of Switzerland. It's very close to a special pilgrim's walk named for Saint Nicolaus of Flue, the patron saint of mystical inner Switzerland, about whom von Franz and Jung both wrote quite a bit. And so it's the heart of Switzerland, and it's a huge tree, as you see. And in the dream, I'm looking at something like just this, from just something like just this spot. And it was 20 years ago, almost exactly, that and then I returned to it just a few weeks ago, took that picture, and then realized that it might be relevant to send it in as an image for this particular seminar, because it shows us that the trees of life are all around us if we care to look. No, not to look. I mean, it's just to experience. I mean, it's there. You know, it's without. It's numinous in a certain way. You just approach it. So I'm looking at this image in the dream, more or less, and behind it is the water. And the voice is saying, that's the objective psyche. That's how deep the tree is in the human psyche. It's so deep that it is objective. It's truth. It is part and parcel of the God, the goddess. The roots go way down into the ground. The branches go way up to the sky. I understand that tree roots go down and out under the ground as far as they go up. I understand there's a complete equation of the two. Some trees grow tall and thin, like the poplar, 5 feet a year. Some trees grow broad and tall, like this one. You could say that the center of the tree is on the ground, and that's where we want to be. We want roots going down into the ground, and we want to grow as tall as we can. That's the basis of yoga. And Franz Kafka, in his incredibly brilliant, ironical way, imagined that Adam's dilemma in Genesis was, he imagined a chain going up to God and a chain going along to the end of the earth. So you've got spirituality and you've got eros relatedness. The more you go up to God in spirituality, the more you cannot go out horizontally in eros. In answer to Job, Jung comments that the Yahweh, in his treatment of Job, was without any eros. It was all spiritual. There was no relatedness to the man Job. There was no feminine. Now, yes, about 100 years ago, apparently, in Paris, G.I. Gurdjieff, you know, Gurdjieff, the man, Uspensky, Gurdjieff, you know, they're still around. Apparently there was a Christmas party, and he comes into the Paris apartment, and he says, let's hang the Christmas tree from the roof. And let's hang the Christmas tree from the roof with the roots at the top. And that's number 5, Ryan. If you could just put it up. In 1621, the alchemist Robert Flood imagines, now I don't know if you can see it as clearly as I can if I go right towards it, but if you look fairly closely, you'll see that it is the sephirotic tree, you see, and you've got the branches in this case, the leaves and the twig and the branches are growing down, and it's got its roots in heaven. And given that energy in the first instance comes from God up in heaven, it's perfectly understandable that we might want to do that. And I don't know if Gurdjieff was aware that that was in fact a Kabbalistic symbol. So this is, you know, a Christian Kabbalistic image of the Sephirotic tree. And you'll see he's got it, yes, you can just see at the very top, I can make out C-H-E-T-E-R, and that means crown. Now, there are other words around there. Then there's Chokhmah is just below that to the left. And then you've got Bina just to the right. And then Chesed and Gevura, left and right respectively. And then you've got, what is it? Oh, my goodness me, I always forget them. You've got, well, he's put Tiferet in there. That's not quite right. You've got Hod and Netzach. They're all there, you see. And then there's names of God as well. And you might note that there's the mystical Jewish Hebrew. You've got the Hebrew letters going down the trunk of the tree towards the leaves, but starting up there. The Yeh, He, the, her, which is unsayable by Jewish people, but it gives us Jehovah Yahweh, and thus Jehovah's Witnesses. So, thanks, Ryan. If you want to put up, did I send you number 6, the rather formal looking? Yeah, okay. This is the Sephirotic tree, just a diagram of it. It's the same thing you just saw. And you've got the letters and the words. I don't want to go through it all, but I'd like you just to imagine that the energy go, one thing you can do, you can make 22 lines connecting up everything with everything else. It's a bit like the transference diagram in Jung, where you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I think 7 or 8, I can't remember. You know what I mean. But there's 22 channels, and they're really channels of energy. And the energy goes from side to side. It goes up and down, and then it goes down to the bottom. And there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, so I'm sure it's no accident that there's in fact 22 forms. Now these are considered to be bits of God. You must understand, these are emanations. They emanate from the Godhead. They emanate. We can say nothing about the top, Ein Sof. You see, I read somewhere, or I dreamed it up, that if you can imagine for a second, going all the way from thing, you end up with no thing or nothing. And if you go all the way from no thing, nothing, you end up with thing. If you can imagine anything remotely resembling that, you can't really imagine Ein Sof, because we're not allowed to say anything about it. It is simply not to be known and not to be discussed. So it's obvious that I will not be able to find any letters about it. Here we are. I have. It's not he. In the Zohar it says, it's not he who is endless, but that which is endless. That which is ungraspable, not he who is ungraspable. Because I suppose it's because we are privileged to receive something from God, you see. But God, the Zohar says, God pours himself out in the emanations. You might think, I can't remember who said this, that the hidden and amorphous, unknowable Ein Sof at the top there, it may parallel the unconscious in its, I suppose we'd say, the deepest archetypal level. You may say that. I think we could. We probably would, because from a psychic point of view, it's hard to imagine anything as completely unknowable. But we don't. So the energy comes down. Jung took great interest in the three at the top. Keter, that's Keter is the Hebrew from the right, the three letters, Keter. Ayin, Ayin is the nothingness. Ein Sof, you see? And then underneath that is Bina, intuition, understanding. Womb, because that's the feminine side of the tree of life, is going down the left. Chokhmah is, of course, is insight, wisdom. I guess that's considered to be more mental, and that for some reason is masculine. As we continue down, just for a minute, Gevura and Deen is very interesting. See, one of the big problems within which we have to live is when the opposites, if you like, between number 4 on the left, Gevura, Deen, and Deen means law, and 5, Chesed. The problem comes in those opposites when they're out of balance. One way they go out of balance is when, von Franz discusses this. Sometimes the feminine, she says, if Mother Nature decides, so to speak, to take revenge in a great tidal wave, that would be the feminine going crazy, Mother Nature. And for some reason, and I'm not quite sure why, chesed is considered to be a masculine attribute, although they're obviously both present ideally and in balance ideally in all of us. But chesed is considered to be mercy. And what we're always looking for, what a lot of Jewish prayers are about, is to get chesed from God and not, of course, Gevurah or Din. The days of awe, the New Year, the Day of Atonement, it's called the Yom Hadin, the Day of the Law. You might say with Franz Kafka, you might say that law has gone crazy in the 20th century. You might say. You might say that law had so little connection to chesed, and that there was so little connection anymore to the divine, to limitation, to two-sidedness, to polarity. And now we're certainly living that out now with these horrendous fundamentalist eruptions. People who are convinced that they know what the law says they are to do, which is to say, I won't repeat it. We're still in Sabbath here in Zurich. Franz Kafka's your man to read, because he's a Kabbalist in the sense that he knows perfectly well, and he tells us about a world in which the law is basically atrophied, sick, and dead. Thus, in the trial, you have indefinite postponement, and you have ostensible acquittal. You are never free to go. You have a man waiting before the law at the end. The parable of before the law. You have a man waiting at the gate, at the door. The doorkeeper doesn't say you can't go through and try your luck. He just says nobody's done it. Then and the man waits, waits, and waits. And then he says things like, how come nobody else has come to this door? And the gatekeeper says, the door is just for you. Everyone has his own door. And the person in when this is told, it's like in Dostoevsky, it makes lying a universal principle, because you never know where you stand. That's when things are haywire. Our prayer, of course, and prayer is sacrifice according to Shalom. Our prayer is that we can relive and work our way back into a harmony through ritual and observances, if we're Jewish, to the tree of life as, of course, a sheltering tree, and not, in our case, the tree, I suppose, of the fruit of which we eat, and we are going to die and be punished. Difficult subject there, and I can't take it on, and I know someone could say, just a minute, I don't want to know what you're talking about there. I'm not quite sure either, it's so difficult. I think I'll be able to come back to the marriage between number 6 and number 10, which sounds horrible. Tiferet is majesty, love, mercy, and 10 is a masculine. Shekhinah, of course, is, Malkut at the bottom is Malkut, you see. It's also known as Shekhinah, the feminine presence, the female presence, the proverbial goddess Sophia who was with God at the beginning, as it reads in Proverbs chapter 3. And that's what Jung envisioned in the great nocturnal gift he received when he was near death, and which I posted in the third one, which you may have read by now. Now, here's to say, Jung found the Kabbalistic symbolism of the tree of life extraordinary, quote. But he said that, and I have to say this because it takes us into, I suppose, the world of Jung and Shalom, Gershom Shalom. He describes Professor Shalom as certainly all wet when he thinks that the Jewish gnosis, which is like personal awareness of God or experience of God, that it contains nothing of the Christian mystery. It contains practically the whole of it, but in its unrevealed pleroma state. Now, Jung is referring to the Trinity at the top, Keter, Bina on the left, Chochmah on the right, which is the unknowable, the first and still unknowable emanation from the Ein Sof. And that unknowable Trinity, naturally, Jung took to be, I won't say naturally, but it's maybe not surprising, he took it to be a prefiguration of the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And it then needed, so to speak, the admixture, the addition of the feminine, which is, I suppose, the Assumptio Mariae, and bingo, we have the quaternity of the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, and Mary. Scholem was asked by James Kirsch, who had a lot of correspondence with Jung about Kabbalah and alchemy and Judaism. He was asked by James Kirsch, Gershom Scholem was, if there was a certain, I think some art stonework in Strasbourg, and Kirsch asked that could show, I thought, a prefiguring in Hebrew myth of the Christ, and Scholem dismisses this completely out of hand. For Scholem, there is no prefiguring, and it's of no interest whatsoever. No Jewish person has ever said, "My goodness, Christ is definitely prefigured in this, that, and the other." It's interesting because we read answer to Job, and it's genius, of course. It's genius. And when you suddenly get it, how do I get it when I get it? I get what Jung's talking about when he talks about how, you know, the incarnation is prefigured in Job's suffering and in Job's bettering God, who is declared to be non compos mentis by Jung, namely not in his sound mind, for letting himself be diddled into permitting Satan to do to Job what he did so unjustly and without apparent reason. And that the answer to Job, which we read and we understand, is we understand it symbolically, of course, numinously and mystically. The answer to Job is given in the sacrifice of God's own Son, Jesus, on the cross, in which God drinks to the dregs what he made his servant Job drink. That's Jung's phrase. So you see, we take that as, quote, readers of Jung, but no one Jewish really can handle that. And that's one of the reasons why Jung, I think it's one of the reasons why a lot of Jewish people have a bit of trouble with Jung, apart from the other obvious one into which I'm not going to enter, the more recent trouble or question, issues. But one of the things that always, I think, bother people right from the start is there's such a Christology, it's called. It's a sense in which Jung may be looking for something. Is he reading in too much? And for his own very serious and good purpose? Is he reading in too much and just taking it for granted that everybody's going to understand that the incarnation is prefigured in the Old Testament, in the story of Job, as understood by Jung in Answer to Job? Ryan is coming on, and it looks like somebody is having a fit. Ryan.
Oh, no, not at all. But someone does have a question. I have a person that asks, why could Scholem not simply say, quote, the Messiah is prefigured in the Kabbalah?
I don't know if Scholem said that or not, except that Bingo. I've got a comment. The Jewish, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it allows me to do a little riff here. Just a second, I'm gonna have a drink.
Of course, and he said it's not that Sholem actually said that. He just said, why could not Sholem just say that?
Here's the story. I have a sense, and I'm making this up, I have a sense that irony is so powerful in the Jewish psyche. And you can understand why, because Jewish people have felt themselves to be physically and materially and concretely defenseless for 2,000 years. And they've broken out of it to such a degree in the state of Israel now that obviously a lot of people are quaking in their boots, including the Iranian nuclear people. Anyway, they've broken out of that. But for 2,000 years, Jews depended on irony. And one of the things about irony is that it helps you to make sense of your present situation. And one of the things that you do is, even though the 13th of the Jewish articles of faith, which are like law to the Orthodox, you see, expounded by the great rationalist, not the spiritualist, the rationalist, Maimonides. The 13th article of faith is, I believe that the Messiah, though he may tarry, will come. Tarry, of course, it's from the French word retard, T-A-R-D, tarry. Tarry means he may be late. He didn't arrive in 1939 in time. They thought he'd arrived in 1660-61 when Sabtai Tzvi roused so much enthusiasm that people literally sold up and got ready to go to the Holy Land from all over Europe. And then he couldn't go any further than Turkish territory, the Ottoman territory, and he was made to convert to Islam or die. And he stopped being the Messiah. So you see, there's an irony. So Maimonides says that, and it's hard to take it seriously. And the Orthodox may know it, because you see, there's a fantastic paradox, that it is said that the Messiah will appear if everyone kept the Sabbath once, the Messiah would appear. Now, think about that for a second, and you realize, well, if everybody kept the Sabbath once, then we're all Orthodox Jews, and we don't need the Messiah. There's no need for the Messiah if everybody's Orthodox Jews. If you're Jewish, and if you're running the Orthodox paradigm. Now, I do know where this one is. Give me a second. This is Franz Kafka. Thank you to the viewer who asked this. It's holding up the train, but it doesn't matter. Franz Kafka. The Messiah will come only when he is no longer necessary. He will come only on the day after his arrival. Wird erst einen Tag nach seiner Ankunft kommen, in the original German. He will come not on the last day, but on the very last. Now, how can you compete with that, with a myth that purports to be true, that Christ was born and suffered and died for our sins and was resurrected and reappeared and the coffin was empty? I don't see how you can compete with that. I mean, I realize it's completely self-defensive. I realize that. It's appalling in a way, because irony can become cynicism, can become skeptical, can become just too clever, and too many Jewish jokes are just too clever and they take us nowhere. Maybe the Kabbalah takes us nowhere. One of the, Murray Stein, hello.
I want to pursue this thing about prefiguration a little bit. It
Yeah.
is in Christian theology. Jung did not come up, he was not the inventor of the idea of prefiguration. It was
Right.
Christian theologians for thousands of years, 2,000 years, have been talking about prefigurations of Christ in the Old Testament. But Jung talks about prefiguration. I think what he's talking about is an archetypal foundation.
Mm-hmm.
That he would say that the archetype that manifests in the Trinity, you know, also manifests in the Kabbalah. So prefiguration is in that psychological sense, there's an archetypal foundation of these symbols, and they
Mm-hmm.
pop up here and they pop up there. It's not so much a historical link as
Mm-hmm.
as emergence phenomenon.
That's actually lovely. I mean, I think we are. I can absolutely welcome that. It's just, I suppose, the terrible, again, the tragic irony is that it did get so dogmatized. It did become concretized. It became an opposite from which there was no relief in the other side. And it's a terrible thing, and it's a profound lesson, I think, for everybody. I completely agree with you. I do accept that completely. I wouldn't argue that for a second. It's interesting, though, that Sholem rejects it out of hand, isn't it?
Of course, yeah.
Because he's a philologist, you see. He's doing his researches into the actual text and what people were actually saying and doing, and he won't have any.
Archetypally, Jung's always thinking archetypally. But what about the relationship of Jung to Judaism? I want you to focus on that just a bit, because I think that comes out in the relationship to Sholem, but it also is very much discussed in the letters with Kirsch and Neumann. We're going to be celebrating the publication of the Neumann letters in Israel next week. There is a tension between Jung and the Jews. I mean, to the point that he was sometimes considered anti-Jew. I don't think he was, and I don't think you think he was, but there certainly is a tension there. And I wonder if you could address that, and does that affect his understanding of the Jewish tradition? Does it get in the way somehow that there is this conflict or tension?
For me, it's a terrible sadness, because I ask myself, and have asked myself much more in the course of preparing this. I ask myself what the likes of the Kabbalah can mean. You see, there is a terrible sadness in it, and it obviously contributes to an enormous complex on the part of Jewish people, and it's a defensive position, and it's hard to shake that. There's a word triumphalism and a millenarianism that's not present in Judaism. It certainly hasn't been. I want to say that Judaism has necessarily put walls around itself. And for example, you don't find until very recently any attempt by any Jewish faction or group to go out proselytizing. Nothing at all. So, and Kabbalah, really, Jewish Kabbalah really was for Jewish people. There's a sad little reminder I noticed in the Kabbalah Denu Data from the 17th century, that it says that it will be useful for the making of hypotheses, for the propagation of hypotheses, for the conversion of Jewish people. And you see, your average Jewish person is such a fit that I don't know if we can if they can get past that. We're not going to get past it in the next 30 or 40 minutes. I do know that. You see, it's a bit peculiar. I have it here. James Kirsch referred to the Jewish inability to accept the incarnation as a defensive complex. Even although, he says, even although he's writing to Jung, even although your answer to Job demonstrates what I call the prefigurations. Remember, as I was saying that, like in the Job episode. And how do we? Yes, it's very difficult to unlearn 2,000 years of defensive complex, and it may or may not be insensitive to call it that and to expect it just like that to be. I mean, all the it's a lot to expect Jewish readers just to say, "Oh, that's great," you know, Christ is prefigured. Well, we know it's a numinous archetype. I repeat, what's done in the name of the archetype is very difficult. But I can go on to something much more positive and much more heroic, and it's definitely time to do that. And that's to talk about the really special, really special Kabbalistic myth. And this is the one that Jung really did find wonderful, and it's a beautiful sharing. Now, in the back of my mind, I'm aware that I've not answered you satisfactorily, Murray Stein, and I've not probably answered anybody satisfactorily, and I don't have a satisfactory answer for myself at this point. It's the kind of thing you have to work on for a long time. I find myself feeling very sad about, in some ways, about the Kabbalah. I'm inserting this in a square bracket, I think. I mean, when you see the Kabbalah, even the Kabbalists from America, they were rampant all over for a while, and they were in the most posh street in Toronto. They had their place, and they're selling Kabbalistic water in plastic bottles. And I don't think that's what we have in mind somehow. So Jung's appreciation, of course, is hugely more beneficial than that. But the most important Kabbalistic myth, I think, all round, is what's called the extraordinarily original Isaac Luria. It's his myth. And Harold Bloom, the great literary critic, considers Isaac Luria to be the only really original, the only visionary Kabbalist. And that means that this is the man who really stepped out, or you might say the Jewish complex. He really stepped right out of it and somehow came up with a truly fantastic myth that could and can take us a long, long way into the future. Isaac Luria lived from 1536 to 1572. He was born in Jerusalem on a street in the old city where I found myself walking 15 years ago, 12 years ago when I was there. There was the house in which Isaac Luria was born. He only had 3 years of real flowering in Safed. Some of you may have heard about the Safed mystics. I mentioned it in The Wandering Jew because it may be that getting out of Spain and being exiled, as it were, was more of a getting closer to Israel, to Palestine, to the Holy Land. And it may be, nobody's sure, if the Safed mystical experience exploded really, because of the horror of the expulsion from Spain, or whether it was independent of it. One doesn't know. There were earlier ideas about the amazing thing that the Godhead is considered to have done, which was to contract himself, and the Hebrew word is that lovely one, tzim-tsum. It sounds Japanese, but it's Hebrew, tzim-tsum. Chinese, dim sum, tzim-tsum. And it's a contraction of the Godhead in order to make space for creation. You see, if we imagine the whole earth and the universe and the whole world being full of him, how can creation happen? So it has somehow to step back without, as it were, withdrawing his energy, but just step back enough. And we can only imagine it. Leonard Cohen sang, there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And there is an image of the universe as all black with just a tiny little ray of light going from the circumference to the center, like a tiny thin pie slice. Luria added the idea that the energy emanating from the Godhead after the contraction, you could almost imagine the contraction as a great cosmic inhalation. You know, breathe in, huge breathing in, and then a huge breathing out to balance that. Otherwise, we die. But the energy was, the breathing out, if you like, was too powerful for the vessels of the shells. This is the myth, the klipot in Hebrew. And there was a terrible cosmic catastrophe. The shells that were supposed to contain God's energy, God himself, parts of God himself in the emanation, in the tree, if you like, the tree of life, that these lower down vessels, they shatter. It's called shavira. And that's how evil is conceived, as having entered the world. Not as something separate, as a separate, not just in humans, not just as in humans, and certainly not evil as just a lack of good, but evil as something much more difficult to contend with. Evil is a genuine opposite, separate and independent, and as inherent in creation itself. That having happened, we are imagined by Isaac Luria to have this incredible task. It's what I call politics. It's what politics could be. The task is to repair. The great myth of exile and redemption. The human ethical task, our very own task, is to engage in what the Hebrew word tikkun, which means repair. And it's considered to be a divinely inspired task. And Jung, understandably, was very excited to learn of this, quote, remarkable idea of restoring the shattered vessels in a partnership with God. That's in letters 2. This is where they absolutely, not just a parallel, this is a true meeting. Because what we're talking about, you see, for the Kabbalists, for the Jewish Kabbalists, repair really, of course, is doing the mitzvot, doing the commandments, doing the Torah as being the word of God, the letters of God, the things of God, as being straight from God. We're doing God's work when we do the things that God has got us writing down. In the beginning was the Word. Myths and rituals. But sometimes, of course, as we know, the rituals can die, or they can fade away, or they can get petrified. So we don't think of ourselves as doing the restoration of the Torah necessarily. But we can certainly think of ourselves as divinely inspired to repair, to reconstitute, if nothing else, the damage done to each and every one of us from the moment we were born and before, and through step by step coming together in movements, mutual movements of consciousness. I just want to say again, I suddenly realized one day, I mentioned it an hour ago, I think, I suddenly realized one day that history is just an idea. You have to understand, I repeat, and we may feel this too, that to think of history as progress, to think of tomorrow as going to be better than today is only an idea. It's an assumption. We may need it as a faith, but if we really accept the divine energy, we'll know that it will be better or it won't. So the old way, before we had any belief in history as a progressive line, the old way was to think of renewing the old rituals and of restoring the old way of doing things. And that's what Jewish people sing every single day. Judaism consists of lots of singings of please return our days of old. Please return our days as of old. Now, what Jung takes, and again, this is where the word incarnation comes in, but this is marvelous. It's exciting. I'm not completely sure why it has to be through incarnation. But anyway, Jung considered that the, quote, impressive Kabbalistic doctrine of helping God to repair and restore shattered and dispersed light, that gives meaning to man's status exalted by the incarnation, which was how he was answering James Kirsch, that it wasn't, they ought to see, that the Jewish people ought to see it's prefigured. But certainly in the Kabbalistic doctrine, you're seeing that man's status is given meaning by the incarnation, by which he means, as I'm sure we know, that Job's experience and the experience of Jesus being as God's Son, being incarnated and then sacrificed, it means that there is, I think, forever a relationship between the divine and the human. And I sometimes like to say the human and the divine. I'm not sure if we should say that. But certainly that if we realize that God is in some way weak and less than perfect, less than omniscient, less than all-powerful, because he let Satan do all that badness. And if Job has, in a sense, by standing up to God and surviving it, has gotten the better of God, then Job actually, as human, is in a way to help God. And Jung considers that Job is in a way to help God become conscious. And that's part of the work of repair. And what you find, of course, is that Jung stresses that idea of co-evolution from as early as 1929 in a wonderful letter to Walter Corti, and going right through Answer to Job to the marvelous late letters on which Edward Edinger wrote a whole book, The New God Image, and ending in his Memories, Dreams, Reflections, where on page 338, for example. Now, nobody's jumping in, so I shall continue with a bit more, and I'm mindful of the time. If we're saying that a part of God is in exile from himself, there's Murray Stein. Do you want to? Murray Stein?
I'm going to tune out now, but
Oh.
I want to thank you, and especially for this tikkun idea, because I do think it also gives a very powerful rationale for our work as psychotherapists.
It does. Absolutely.
We're also working, at that level.
Absolutely. That's why I mentioned damage. That's why I talked about it. That's what I mean. The early damage in some ways can be repaired. I mean, the Kabbalists would sort of shudder if we, quote, reduced it to ourselves, right? But obviously we're doing God's work.
We're participating in that work.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. And
okay.
For
good to see you.
And especially for that part. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. I'll continue just a few minutes for those who are still hanging in. Is that all right, Ryan?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Please go as long as you'd like. I had one thought. You just talked about the early damage. This is the slide that you showed us earlier, the tree in Zurich. If you look down at the base, you can see that damage.
Oh, well done, Ryan.
I thought that the second I started hearing you talk about it, that came to mind, and I wanted to show you that. That's a big archetypal symbol. And it's right in the middle, right in the heart of it, where you say we are. Our roots grow below, our limbs stretch to the sky, but the damage is close to us. I just wanted to bring that up real quick while we had a moment, but you continue along as long as you would like.
That's really very good. That's very good. Yes. Well, the wounded healer, if we're blessed and if we're able to come to terms with living between the opposites, we will perhaps be able to understand that from the wound and from the damage can come so much self-awareness as to be able to keep going. An amazing story, a Hasidic story, is told of a young man who wanted to marry, and he goes to the rabbi and presents his credentials, which is to say that his mother and his mother's mother's and his mother's mother's mother were Jewish, and therefore he is Jewish and is entitled to marry a Jewish man. And then the rabbi to whom he presents it finds a flaw in the presentation and says, "I'm terribly sorry. If you are one of us, you cannot marry because it's not kosher. For some reason, there's a flaw, you know, like a scar, as Ryan showed us in the tree, a big white blob." And the man, of course, was broken. But he went on, somehow in the story, he gathered himself together and he became a great, great scholar and educator and mystic. Never married, you know. And yes, that can happen. I just wanted then to repeat, I mentioned it just apropos Jung's great vision is it really the fact that it came in 1944, early 1944, the vision in that wee small hour when he's had his chicken soup, as I fancy, and he has the vision of being present at the sacred marriage in the garden of pomegranates, the Pardes Ramonim. Pardes gives us the 4 types of Torah study, which is the same thing as what we do with a dream. We've got the literal text, and we amplify, we associate, and then we look for the deep meaning, the hidden meaning, the mystical meaning, and that's the Pardes in Hebrew, and I think it gives us paradise. And so there's Jung in the Pardes Ramonim, and he's present at the marriage, the sacred marriage, the goal, the whole thing, the conjunctio, the conjunction, the union. And it's Tiferet and Malkut, like I said, and the whole endeavor, the whole Kabbalistic endeavor is to bring Tiferet, the majesty, kingdom, the love, the masculine aspect, together to reunite with the earthly, the bodily, the female presence of the goddess, if you like, the Shekhinah. It's not named as the goddess, but it's wisdom, Sophia, and that, yes, that is prefigured in the Old Testament to some degree, certainly in Sophia. And there he is present to this. And can you imagine? He says, now, you could say, I don't know if you knew I'm not for sure, don't know for sure that he knew the central sacred importance in the myth of the tree and of the unfolding and the emanations of the bringing back together, the repair of Tiferet and Malkut. He mentions that it was sort of new to him in 1954 in this letter, where he talks about this remarkable material about the repair. He mentions that he's just come upon it, across it. I don't know if he knew really about Tiferet and Malkut. If we found, for example, that he had the vision for the first time on a Friday night, then we really would all die and go to heaven, because one of the ideals of Jewish life is that kind of thing is ritualistically, symbolically reenacted every Friday night in the lighting of the candles, which are male-female, in the breaking of 2 loaves of bread, which are male-female, and of the mother, the father, the husband, the wife, the man, the woman, and it's that coming together. Every Friday night we get to reenact that. It might be spoiled in the kinds of houses like mine, where my mother couldn't stand the dirt from the wax, and she substituted wax candles. I leave that with you. I don't know if it's kosher. I don't think it's quite kosher enough. She might have lit the candle just before Sabbath came in, so maybe it was okay. I don't know. It would be, I suppose. You see, that's the way the law people talk. They talk about whether that would have been kosher. So in any case, there. Now, but yeah, I just want to stress again, and you have no idea how many times it's repeated, that redemption is based on the bringing together, the marriage the reuniting of Shekhinah and God. And it has an historical basis because it is always felt and it's stated that the Shekhinah went into exile when the children of Israel were exiled 586 to Babylon, the big exile. And then, of course, since the Second Temple destroyed in the year 70. Just interesting to know, one thing I feel like mentioning, this is from about the year 1200. A Jewish, a rabbi scholar said that he said, those who perform the ritual, quote, lend stability as it were. That as it were is very careful. The ritual lend stability as it were to a part of God himself, if we might speak in this way. It's quite something. So, you know, there's been glimmerings of the idea that there could be a co-evolutionary partnership between ourselves and God. And you can probably realize that to people who have only got memories of exile upon exile upon exile, of crucifixions and of being thrown out of here and of being forced to confess and to recant that ever they were Jewish and that they want to embrace Christianity. And I'm talking of the Inquisition, you know, in Spain. To people like that, you can understand that the Isaac Lury's myth was really something fantastic, and it continues to be something fantastic. And then finally, you see, we come to that story with which I began, the Sabbath evening story about missing the boat on which the Messiah and the Shekhinah were traveling, when it happened to stop in for the Sabbath evening meal at the home of Rabbi Isaac of Callow. And just in case you didn't quite realize, you'll now, I trust, please read that story again. And for me, it is one of the most pathetic, in the sense of arousing pathos. It's the sense of pathos of suffering. You can feel the longing you see for that marriage, that sacred marriage, the longing for it, the idea that this couple will come along. And who knows where, who, when, and how, and to feel that, and to the tragedy, of course, is the reason it's tragic is because you can't blame the young Hasidic visitors, because I mean they are doing their job, they are observing the laws, and that's how they feel that our emancipation, our salvation will come, and the Messiah will come when we're all doing that. And they don't realize that opposite the law is the story. And the story has to be rewritten and reenacted every moment of every day of our lives. And I believe, I'm convinced it exactly parallels the apocryphal Gospel of James, which I'm sure some of you will know, that fantastic statement in the Gospel of James. See, and this is Christian apparently, but I couldn't care less in this case, where Jesus is said to have come upon a man working on the Sabbath. Which, of course, is far worse than the idea that I could marry my beloved on the Sabbath, right? Working is crass, it's, you know, right? Filthy lucre, as Martin Luther called it. Money, money, money. You see, it's the money changers in front of the temple. Well, not quite, you see, because what Jesus says, according to the gospel, is if you know, in other words, if you are conscious of what you are about, then you are blessed. But if you don't, then you are cursed. So, the young Hasidic guys didn't realize that. They couldn't stretch the law to be flexible enough to embrace the ever new, which is the myth, the dream, last night's dream. They couldn't stretch it. It's wow. Anyway, that's it. It hit me like a big bag because you can imagine the things we've missed. Now, one more thing. I think one more thing. The reality of evil is an extremely difficult topic. It's almost incomprehensible really to accept evil as having an independent and opposite existence. We get a little closer by being able to say that apparent good, I mean that good may only be apparent, and that evil may only be apparent. The expulsion from Spain it seemed to be actual enough as an evil, but as you know, the ironists come along and say, well, you know, as I said, I think I mentioned this, I think 20 or 30,000 of those who were expelled found their way to Salonika, I think it was, or Constantinople, and the Sultan there was quite welcoming, you see, so they probably ended up being better there than they were in Spain, you see. They're not in the Holy Land, and they've lost relatives, and they've lost their property, and they have to start again, but Jewish people are used to that because we're the eternal wanderers, etc. And then what would be an evil and apparent good? Well, you know, you'd have thought the founding of the State of Israel would have been good enough, but for the Palestinians, it's not been good enough. And if we care enough, and if we take that other strand of being Jewish, which is to say, you know, that we're people of the book, that we really respect and try to live by God's ways, we really ought not to treat anyone the way we wouldn't want to be treated ourselves. So that's not so fantastic. So what did Jung mean when he said, just after the writing of Answer to Job and the publication of it, he says, in answer, I guess, to a question, and it's quoted by von Franz, but it's a bit of a nuisance. She doesn't say quite where he said it and when. Must have been right after. He said that since the writing of Answer to Job, I live in my deepest hell, and I cannot imagine sinking any further. He must be referring to the dark side of God. The idea that if in the shattering of the vessels, that if they contained evil and the evil is let loose in the shattering, that means that they are in some measure of divine origin, as well as human, I suppose. So and Jung found that at that point. You know, maybe it's because we were living so much in the shadow of the likely nuclear annihilation in the early 50s. Now, let me just see some parting word here. Oh, yes. I did find something on one of I had many scraps of paper, you know, and I didn't try to put them in an order. I just assumed that I would spot the one that needed to be spotted. This is quite weird, talking about evil. We would say that Jung was a Kabbalist, and for what little it's worth, in the dream, I was either fantasizing or there is a dream truth. Someone in a dream said to me, and it's only a little bit of the dream, someone in a dream said to me, "You're a Kabbalist." And in the dream I said, "Why?" And the answer was, "Because you accept the reality of evil." And that was, I think, Jung after the writing of Answer to Job, because it's the realization that evil has to be accepted as a rule. I think that's enough. I can, if anyone has a question through Ryan, that would be lovely. Otherwise,
That was quite a wonderful presentation, Tony. I can't tell you how interesting it was. Especially you talk
I
about
got lost being asked about the information. I'll
well,
tell you that.
it was a good thing. That's where some of the best content came from.
Oh, well, thank you.
Your talk about the necessary walls for protection, that's such a fascinating.
That just came to me.
Yeah, and it's,
Thank you.
it's true for so many things. We look at America right now, we're looking at the Patriot Act coming up in June, whether or not we're going to react it or take it away. You talk about those electronic walls. I mean, all of our emails are being, routed, especially any email I've sent to you over in Switzerland gets caught up. These are walls that we've drawn up since 9/11 to try and protect ourselves from a necessary evil. And now we're trying to figure out, well, does one necessary evil, this spying on our own people, is that necessary?
You destroy the good, of course, yes.
And
but they
then,
actually talk about putting a fence around Torah. It's an extremely important notion they have, that because it needs protection.
Oh, yeah. And beyond that, you look at the African American, the black community in America right now. What happened over the weekend? Holy smokes. They are obviously drawing up walls, and they have been for so long, but now how can I blame them? Ferguson, South Carolina. South Carolina is right across the street for us. Myrtle Beach is where, I went when I was younger. I don't associate those things with that, but now I must, and I, draw up that wall myself.
Well, the terrifying thought, Ryan, is the following. And it's partly in this and partly not. Obviously, all we can do, really, I won't say all because it's so vitally important. A couple of things occur to me. One is to remember, Jung wrote in a letter that every single relationship has its optimum distance. By which he means, I think, that in every single relationship you can come as close or as far as you can come. And I think the other thing we have to do, Voltaire said we have to cultivate our own garden. Cultivate, not close it down. As his answer to the apparent natural evil of the earthquake in Lisbon in 1756. And that won't really quite do, but if you take it as meaning, cultivate that which I can, cultivate that which is closest. And in a certain sense, no news is good news. And we really never watch the TV news because it might interfere with tonight's stream. And that's not because I don't sympathize with everybody being trampled to death. I mean, it's horrific and terrible. But then the scary thought is that it really is not going to be any better millennially. It really isn't, and that we're just blessed to be in places where the trees are blooming each year and where we're still drinking clean water or whatever you think. It's really something. Yes, it's really something. And it's about, and we must keep telling those stories. I mean, imagine, everybody imagine, just cast your minds back. Look at my picture, that wonderful picture, that photograph of the old rabbi on that desolate street in the middle of Krakow. He's walking along, and a guy called Vishniak, and obviously he's probably from East Europe. He's gone to America, he's got the name, he comes back, 1938, he has a commission of recording the life in the Jewish shtetls, the villages, the little communities of East Europe, because everybody knows that the writing is on the wall. There he is. Thanks, Ryan. Well done. What a way to near the end of this evening. I mean, look at it. Just look at it, the slush. I mean, it's paved. It's not so terrible. But I mean, there it is, you see. And look, he's got his stick, I think. He's got his hands in he's got a nice, that's called a streumel. That's a special felt hat. And he's got those you get the face has been, is 2,000 years old.
And this is a newspaper clipping. I mean,
that was a clipping. It must have been in a review of the book, and I spotted that, cut that out for some reason. But I've got the book as well, and it's the book is called A Vanished World, and it's terribly the terrible thing is when you look at any of these books with photographs of people whose world has been stolen, destroyed, and their faces are glowing. I mean, the young Jewish boys in the shtetl study halls and the synagogues, their faces are glowing with the joy of living that way. And it's just stolen from them. Every Saturday morning at 9 o'clock, 3, 4, 5, or 6 black hat, adolescent, black clad Jewish boys climb the steep hill up to the little synagogue up the road where they help to make up the quorum. And they're all chattering away, and 2 hours later, they come chattering back down the hill. And if I were just to say to them, you know, you're all victims of the law, you know, has it ever occurred to you that it's all a myth? Right? Say, I don't think they'd say, no, we're doing God. Well, they might say we're doing God's work. We're keeping the world in order.
I do have one good question that I think would be good to close on.
Okay.
We had a guest ask us, the entire history preserved in the Torah and the prophets recounts a dialogue between Yahweh and the Jewish people. Do you see that dialogue continued in Jewish mysticism? And if so, how?
Well, with respect, I certainly see it continued every time we have a dream. When Jung was talking, with that wonderful, I know it's in C.G. Jung speaking, and I keep forgetting where it was. Someone interviews him. He said, well, you know, how do you talk about grace? And Jung said, well, you know, a good dream, that's grace. And don't you feel that? I mean, imagine, you know, you go to bed wondering what, you know, the self means, the objective psychic. And in the night, by some magical spiritual process, without beginning and without end, which is how to talk about God, you are the beginning and you are the end. It's a Jewish way of saying it. It's just the same as what they said in ancient Greece, I know. They said that of Zeus. You are the beginning and you are the end. The first and the last, sorry, the first and the last. Ata Rishon, the Ata Acharon in Hebrew. So imagine the one that's without beginning and end sends me a dream. And then in the dream, I get what I consider to be an answer. And the only thing you can really do after that is to say, gratias ago tibi. And that's the Latin formula for, I thank you, O God. And on a good day, that is satisfactory. And I just pray your questioner will be content for the moment. Provisionally.
Well, Tony, today's talk was marvelous. I know that I enjoyed it. I guarantee that everybody watching out there enjoyed it. And once I create this recording, we'll have a whole slew of other people that will enjoy this. Do you have any final thoughts before we close for the day?
Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must keep silent. That was Wittgenstein.
Very nice. Well, Tony, we've enjoyed having you so much.
I appreciate your efforts, and I appreciate your ability to bring a neophyte to 21st century telecommunications.
It's been my pleasure, and we're gonna try and keep in contact with you because you are a wonderful presenter.
Thank you.
So, thank
you
so much.
It was a little harrowing at times.
Well, it always is, especially like you said, when you've got an island of information and papers around you and you're searching for the right notes.
Yes, and you're aware that you can't just walk out.
That's right.
Thank you very, very much. It's been an honor. Thank you.
Our pleasure, Tony. Thank you so much.
This is the water of life, L'chaim.
I'm glad to see that it's not in a plastic bottle, as you said earlier, being sold on the street. Have a wonderful evening, Tony. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.